I was able to talk to John Anderson yesterday about the prayer trees and the culturally modified trees that he has seen and studied across the nation. And it was a wonderful chat, very eye opening. He is a man after my own heart. He researches his topic and just is very passionate about what he does. So I encourage you guys to listen to this. This is not an interview talking about a fictional book. This is as a if you want to look at it as a study project. But this is about our history, the history in our country. The Indians, Native Americans, there's different groups. They've altered these trees, and this was a way of providing a trail marker, a guide for people to come after. So they were putting in there a lot of effort and a lot of care to show the people that came after them how to get there safely. And it was really, really interesting to me to listen to John explain this and hear all the work that he's done. And thank you to all the people that shared with him and let him share this information, because it was really, really wonderful to hear. So I hope you guys enjoy this talk on the prayer trees. His book is in our library. His book is also on Amazon. So I hope you enjoy it. And of course, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you can see more stuff from our library. All right. Have a great day. All right. So this is our Pines and Plains Libraries author interview series. And I am Becca. And I am interviewing John Anderson, a Colorado Springs author. And you have got, 6 books out and one more coming.
Right. First
Okay.
quarter of next year, 2021.
All right, cool. Well, so for everybody watching, this is looking a little different. They have seen me with stacks of books behind me as I sit in, the teen area or somewhere trying to find a quiet corner in our library. Everything is surging with the COVID stuff, so now you get to see my dining room. So, and you're also at home, right?
I am. This is my home office. This is where I do 95% of my writing.
Right. All right. So a little bit different today. We may see cats and dogs. Who knows? We may see or hear a FedEx delivery truck honk or something at either one of us. So it'll be a little interesting, but I think it'll be fun.
Yeah.
So, all right. So first off, we're going to talk about just a couple of your books today. I think we'll talk about, you've already got the slide up, the Native American prayer trees. I love this topic. You were in our Elizabeth branch in February and did a presentation, and we had so many people come. We had to turn some people away, and some people just stood in the back, and it was so, so well loved and received. And so as we've been doing this author interview series, kind of, doing this online instead of having people to the library, hey, I know you were just out in February, but would you want to do this, online? And you were so gracious and you said yes. So here we are. And we are going to get to hear about all sorts of stuff from you with these prayer trees. And so take it away. Let's hear about the prayer trees, about this first book that we will talk about, and then I may pop in and ask you some questions here, and if I get to going.
Please do, Becca. Jump in anytime. And let me start by just thanking you and the Plains and Prairies Library for hosting this event. I think with this COVID thing, we're all just so pinned up, and it's so nice to be able to, virtually, connect with people, especially about something that we're passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
And these Native American culturally modified trees, often referred to as prayer trees or spirit trees, it's such a fascinating subject, and it resonates with people of all ages, whether you're young or or older like me, or you know, a hiker, or interested in Native American history. It's just such a fascinating subject, and to think that there are living Native American cultural artifacts all around us. And I grew up on a small ranch south of Simla. Everybody knows where Calhan is. And if you've been to the Calhan paint mines, our ranch was about 8.5 miles further south from that. So I
Mm.
graduated high school at Ellicott. But whenever I'd hike on our ranch, we had 160 acres. So if I was out trying to catch a horse or shoot a rabbit or whatever I was doing, I always watched the ground for arrowheads. And when was with my mother, I was so envious because she had much better eyesight and she could spot them further away. So she'd come back with more arrowheads or chips or points than I did. And you
Hmm.
always could tell, you know, what an arrowhead looked like, you know, and everybody grew up, you know, knowing that and happened to look for the shapes and the flaking and all that. But what I'd never heard about until about the mid 80s was the Native American prayer trees, Ute prayer trees, culturally modified trees. And that's what we're looking at here on the right, is an extraordinary, huge ponderosa pine that was bent, modified when it was really little. So if you've ever, I'm sure most people have, gone up and grabbed a ponderosa pine, these are really sturdy tree, and they get sturdy
Hmm.
really about the first 20, 25 years. So this tree that we're looking at here that I'm standing behind, you couldn't bend that, you know, if it was more than 20, 25 years old, close to the ground like that. You might be able to bend the top. But this tree is probably at least 300, 350 years old. So if you think about that, this is a Native American artifact that predates the Declaration of Independence. Now, how cool is that?
Wow.
These
Oh,
are
that's awesome.
that we can find them. And one of the differences with the arrowhead, this one here, I picked it up on our ranch. I still have it in my collection half a century later. But I was the only one who ever got to experience the joy of finding that arrowhead. But these trees are still there, and they can be
Hmm.
with families and other people, because you can't pick that up and put it in your pocket. Um, had you heard of culturally modified trees, Becca, CMTs,
No,
or
no,
this?
not until I saw your information.
Yeah, and I was so fascinated with how many people came to the Elizabeth Library for the talk, and many of them brought with their iPhones. They brought pictures, you know, on their property, ones that they found
Hmm.
hiking. And I had not heard of Native American culturally modified trees again until about 20 years ago. Um, And I wasn't familiar with the term culturally modified tree or CMT, but we've all grown up recognizing what kind of tree this is. It's a bonsai,
Hmm.
and these have been shaped by the people of China and Japan going back for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. They're all over the world today, and there's a lot of similarities with the Native American culturally modified trees in the bonsai tree, the way that they're
Yeah.
shaped, pruned and directed to grow according to the sunlight. The big difference, obviously, is that these trees are stunted. They're smaller. But when you're dealing with a Native American culturally modified tree, these are full size. These are huge trees, big ponderosa pines. But they weren't done for an art form like maybe someone might shape a bonsai tree. They're really done
Hmm.
for a purpose, either for navigational purposes, educational, ceremonial, medicinal. The most common that we come across are the trail marker trees, like what we're looking at here. Sometimes they're referred to as a TMT, trail marker tree. That's a variety of a culturally modified tree, and you'll sometimes see the acronym CMT. So a TMT, trail marker, is also a culturally modified tree. So in North America, the most common ones of CMTs are the TMTs, trail marker trees. And these were done for the same purposes that we see road signs today. If there was plants that could be used for medicine, or if there was game ahead, or if the trail was advising you of a warning or a bend or how to connect to another trail, pointing to a resource. So the people who modified these trees, the trail marker trees, they didn't do that for themselves. You know, obviously they knew where they were at. Who they were trying to direct were the people that would follow them. And that's what some of the Ute elders had shared with us is they didn't do this for themselves. They knew where they were at. They were trying to help the people that would come behind them. The tree on the left is in Eagle County. In the background, you can see I-70. So this is as you're going west on Vail Pass, and it's pointing towards Gore Creek. And if you went up Gore Creek over Gore Pass, you'd be on the Ute White River Indian Reservation if you're doing that in the 1820s, 18 up to about the 1860s. The one on the right is in the Black Forest area. One of the things to point out is this 30-degree angle of inclination. Can you see my pointer?
Uh-huh.
And so if you see this line here, it's about a 30-degree angle from the center. So if this was 0 and 90, that's about 35 degree, and that angle is going to be important. But I wanted to draw everybody's attention to this part of it looks like a dead branch. It's not. It's the original primary trunk. So the trunk was extending
Oh.
out here. And what happened is when they tied that tree down to, and I'll explain how they do that in a minute, but tie it down to a wooden stake or something, a rock or something in the ground to, again, when this is really a little tree. And so they're pointing in a particular direction. The one on the left, notice how this primary trunk extends way, way, way out here. And then it just withered and died. You see how that died? Boy, with this one, what's different is someone came back after this tree had grown a secondary trunk. That's called a leader. That's what this is, or this part. And that primary trunk is no longer serving a function. And so to continue the modification for all the growth to go upward, which would be the direction the tree wants to grow anyway, seeking the sunlight, someone returned to that trunk and girdled it by cutting all the bark all the way around that trunk. So that's one of the things you look for is evidence of human modification. So we'll talk about that. But this is one of the photos that was previously unpublished and is in my first book. And I'm really proud of the 3 old photographs that are in my first book. They've never been published before. So the first time this photo was ever brought out as from a negative photo was in my book. But one of the reasons I put it there was to show the angle of inclination of a teepee lodge pole as at about that 30-degree angle. When I wrote the first book in 2015, we didn't have access to a lot of information on the other tribes. And as you know, Becca, especially where you live, there are and were other Native Americans, especially the Cherokee and the Arapaho and the Plains Indians. The Comanche were here in Colorado in the 1700s, but we didn't know a lot about them, and we knew even less about their tree modification traditions until this book came out in 2017. And this was an extraordinary little book. It might be one that the library wants to pick up. It's called The Comanche Marker Trees of Texas. And what's fascinating is this was written by 3 co-authors. Steve Hauser is a 40-year career forester. Linda Palin, Dr. Palin, is a career educator, anthropologist at the collegiate level. And Jimmy Arterberry, it was at the time the cultural preservation officer of the Comanche Nation in Texas. He's been promoted since, so he's not doing as much with the trees. But one of the things that was so fascinating was the cover of their book. They put these 2 trees that are intertwined, and Jimmy refers to these as story trees. And what he says is we, the Comanche, are the only ones who ever modified trees to be a story tree. And if you turn to page 5 on that book, it talks about how the Comanche learned to modify trees when they lived among the Ute. And that had to have been here in Colorado because the Ute were never in Texas for any sustained period of time. So when we find a tree like this one on the right, that's way south in Colorado, almost to the New Mexico border, and it's so different than many of our other Ute trees. So we have to question, could this have been modified by the Comanche or the Hickory Apache, who were in northern New Mexico, who we now know also modified trees, or could it have been some of the tribe that had access to this area? So one of the things that's been fascinating in this search is to try to find, by going back through journals or old maps, um, who had access to what we know as Colorado. And if you look in the, excuse me, in the upper right-hand corner of this map, it has a legend up here. Now, this is written in Spanish, Castilian Spanish, and we've had it translated by a friend of ours, a professor from New Mexico, Dr. Moles. And so we have the Castilian to Spanish to English translation. And if you look out, this is the Front Range. And so, excuse me, in the lower right-hand corner is what we know today as New Mexico, and you can still pick out the cities of Albuquerque and Santa Fe and Taos. So this is the Front Range, the Rocky Mountain Range. And over on the right, you can start seeing these little icons. Do you see these little teepee looking things?
Yeah.
Do you see those? And they're labeled Comanche, and that's Spanish for Comanche. And then if you look over here, like in the center, there's 6 of these little teepees, and the Spanish word is Utahs, Y-U-T-A-S, and of course that gets shortened to Utes, and that's what the state of Utah gets its name for the Utes. So what we're seeing in the upper right is today's Colorado, the upper left is the Great Lakes area, and then Arizona here. So it's almost a 4-state area, and this map is dated up here in the corner, 1778. So it's an old Spanish map, maybe one of the first ones that ever showed the plains. This is what we know today as the Arkansas River, and Sierra El Magre is Pikes Peak. So we get a sense of, with the rivers and the mountains in the fixed locations, where the Comanche and where the Ute were at that one moment in time in 1778. One of the other things that we did was created, and this was on the advice of Dr. Lois Adams, and she's retired now, a career educator. And she said, John, you know, this makes a lot of sense to you, but what we need, especially for younger people who aren't familiar with this, is we need something visual. We need some kind of a reference chart. So we worked together, Dr. Adams and I, and collaborated on what we call a culturally modified tree or CMT verification chart or V chart. And so what you have to do, because not every bent tree is going to be, you know, a culturally modified tree. There's a lot of natural causes, you know, an animal, you know, a porcupine could climb up to the top of a young pine tree and nibble on the top and cause it to go different directions, or it could be lightning struck or heavy snowfall or wind or disease. We have a lot of mistletoe in the Black Forest where I live, northeast of Colorado Springs, or it could be some man-caused damage. You know, if this is near a road, this trail marker tree here is just north of the town of Kuchara.
Did I lose you?
That one right here. And it's at that 30-degree angle, but it's right off of this highway. It's a paved highway now.
All right, so we are back from our technical difficulty. All right, we are alive.
Those things happen.
I know, crazy.
I just wanted to show you this slide and emphasize the point that not every bent tree that you're going to come across in the forest is a culturally modified tree. There's a lot of natural reasons for a tree to be bent. You know, it could be an animal that, you know, an elk or something that rubs, you know, the bark off, or a porcupine climbs to the top of a young sapling and nibbles on the terminal bud, or it could be bent over from heavy snowfall or lightning or disease. We have a lot of mistletoe in the Black Forest, so you have to be aware that, you know, there are natural causes for the tree to be harmed. But once you've eliminated those natural causes, if you start at the right side of the V chart, this verification chart, and start asking these questions, well, is the tree even old enough? You know, for it to be modified by the Native American people, it needs to be at least 120, 30 years old. So we're older trees. And you have to kind of look at the whole terrain. You know, is there a trail nearby or a source of water? Could it be pointing to something? This one in the middle is pointing to Levita Pass. It's near Kuchara, and there's a highway that runs right next to it. That's kind of a windy highway. And so that was almost certainly a single track Indian trail that got widened to a wagon trail and then later became a county road. So you want to see if there are other Native American culturally modified trees or features, any any petroglyphs or teepee rings or something else nearby. And then you want to inspect the tree closely, especially the trunk. See if there's any evidence of tie-down marks or peeled bark
Mm-hmm.
that you might see in the tree. And how they tied the tree down and they bent it was using yucca cordage. So that's one thing everybody in the plains knows is the yucca cactus. And the Native American people, they would take the fibers from the stalk of the cactus, and they would braid those fibers together. So you can imagine how long that would take them to create a rope. But this is a
Oh,
very
gotcha.
lightweight rope. This braided rope is a cordage, but they use that for eagle snares and for reins on horses, and there's a lot of uses. This yucca cordage is holding this cache of arrowheads, projectile points together, and this was found in a cave in Utah. And the projectile points were estimated to be 900 years old. Beautiful, some obsidian and some flint that's not from Colorado, Utah. So this cache came in. It must have been a priceless cache. And someone along 900 years ago stuffed that away in a cave. So this was never exposed to sunlight or snow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons why the fibers lasted so long. So if you can imagine, when this ponderosa pine was really a young tree, someone tied that yucca cordage around it and staked and tied it to a stake in the ground. And then as the tree grew, it gets these indentations in the bark. And it's just like if you took baling wire or bob wire and you went up to a
Mm-hmm.
small tree, you know, and you wrapped it around there. And as the tree grows, it's going to leave these indentations. So this is
Mm-hmm.
how they bent the tree at whatever angle they wanted when the tree was little and as it's growing. So they didn't have 4 yucca cordage ropes on here. They had 1. So as the tree is growing, seeking sunlight, then they would return maybe the next year and move the cordage down, and then the tree would grow. Don't know why there's a bigger gap here. Maybe we got more moisture that year, or maybe they missed
Yeah.
that year, and then they returned the following year. So there's 4 indications, 4 evidence of human modification until they got that tree at the right angle that they wanted. This tree on the left, you can see has, we'll wait for the slide to catch up. It has 2 90-degree bends, so you can see the trunk comes up about 14 inches above the ground, then makes a dramatic 90-degree turn, runs across the ground for about 6 or 7 feet, and then it goes skyward again. And on the inside of this curve where I'm pointing at, it has the indentations from the yucca cordage. And what they would do, we know this from the Cherokee because they had written about this. The Cherokee had a written alphabet from 1820 on. So we know some of their modification traditions that were written and passed down. And this is not too, it's in northern El Paso County, or I'm sorry, southern Douglas County, just north of the El Paso County line, but it's right off of the Cherokee Trail. And the Cherokee Trail connected Bent's old fort off the Santa Fe Trail to Fort Bridger in Wyoming. So the Cherokee Trail was almost certainly blazed by some of the Cherokee men a long time ago. So this tree may actually be Cherokee. We don't know for sure, may never know. But the fascinating thing about this one is it had 4 other trees around it. And there used to be a 5th tree right here that got cut down with a modern day chainsaw. Probably
Mm-hmm.
putting the power in for this house that's back here, and they had to put a guide wire down, not realizing that they were cutting down a 300-year-old cultural artifact. So it's really disappointing that happens, but it's one of the reasons that motivates us to get out and share the word about these trees so that people know that, hey, these are really priceless historical treasures that we have. We need to preserve them as long as we can. So one thing to look for on this one and that first bend, you can't see it very well unless you get up really close to your screen, but there's a cut that goes down along the top of the bark where they've opened the outer bark and then they've severed the fibers in that trunk, which allows the tree to lay over a little easier instead of just popping right back up. But the most fascinating thing on this tree is if you walk around the tree to the front and you look down, this is the primary trunk that's sticking out here. Now, you couldn't bend that tree if it was that big around. That's about a 3 or 4 inch diameter primary
Mm-hmm.
trunk. So it had to have grown for a few more years, maybe a decade or two or three. But this is what I want to get your attention to right here, where the bark stops right up against this weathered wood of the primary. You can see that there was a cut that went there, and then a really pronounced cut here. And then whoever was making that cut lifted the sharp edged instrument, made another cut here, and that goes all the way around that primary trunk. Someone has girdled that trunk by cutting the bark all the way around, intentionally killing off that part of the tree to the right so that all of the sun-seeking growth of the tree would go up that secondary trunk. So this has got everything going for it to help identify it as being human modified, human caused. Some people say, oh, all of the trees, when the pioneers got here, they could just cut them all down. They clear cut all the trees when Palmer was putting in the railroads and building Denver and Colorado Springs. They needed all that lumber. Well, they didn't get all of them. They might have got 90%, but there is some old growth out there. And if you've got a tree like this one that's been, you can't make a 2x4 or a railroad tie out of that. And when the pioneers got here and they first started lumbering the forests, the black forest, those trees were absolutely huge. They had never been cut before. So instead of trying to mess with a bent one, you just go to the next one. That's why we think that so many of these old growth trees that are culturally modified trees has survived, is because you couldn't use them, for a fireplace.
Right.
All bent. But what we are learning from the dendrochronology, the tree ring dating analysis, is that these trees are sometimes hundreds of years old, and they don't have to be massive to be old. This one's only about 12 inches in diameter at the base. A tree grows from the top up, so it's going to have more rings at the bottom than it will at the top. So the first ring it's called a pith ring, like the pith of a seed, and that's year 0. That's when the tree first started growing.
Mm-hmm.
This one, it's got this orangey cinnamon color, and then it stops right here where there was a fire scar. Then the tree that takes on, when it's growing, kind of this bluish or greenish bluish tint. Any idea, Becca, what might have caused that?
I have no idea.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have either. But what the dendrochronologist tells us is this tree, after the fire scar, was so heavily damaged in the fire that it could no longer produce the pheromones. And the pheromones are what is chemical that wards off, and in Rocky Mountain areas, the Rocky Mountain pine beetle. So the tree is stressed, and what we're seeing, this bluish greenish tint, is the wood now has been impacted by the Rocky Mountain pine beetle. And some people really like, I think it's a pretty color too. I shouldn't just say some people, but the bluish greenish tint in wood is really coveted. A lot of your high-end mountain homes, they'll build their cabinetry out of pine beetle distressed wood. So it's really, really a coveted wood. This is one of the things that fascinated me. Would have thought, based on nothing, just a guess, that once the tree was infected by the Rocky Mountain pine beetle, that would probably kill the tree in the next 3 to 5 years. But this tree lived another 110 years. So the pine beetle doesn't kill the tree immediately. So this tree began growing well before the Revolutionary War. It was standing dead when we found it. We don't know how long it's been dead, probably 20, 25 years. We got permission from the landowner and from a Ute elder, Dr. Jefferson. This is him here on the right in the black shirt that's sitting down. He is an 87-year-old Ute tribal elder from the Southern Ute Reservation. And I've had the privilege of traveling across much of Colorado and into Utah and northern New Mexico with him in search of these culturally modified trees, many of them modified by his ancestors. But this is what's really extraordinary. Many of these trees are pointing to sacred places, and that's what we've come across here west of Denver. Between Morrison, where the Red Rocks are, if you run up Highway 285 west, and Kenosha Pass. As I was talking to Dr. Jefferson, James Jefferson, I asked him, I said, Kenosha sounds like an Indian word. He says, it is. He said, it means water jug. And he said it would have been named by the Indian people to tell you that there's water on this side or water on the other side of Kenosha Pass. But if you're going up Kenosha Pass, you want to fill your Kenosha, your water jug, because you're not going to have water at the top. What we're seeing here is a medicine wheel that's made out of 100% white quartz, milky white quartz crystal. And the center stone is absolutely huge. It's got to weigh several hundred pounds. It's about 3.5 feet out of the ground. Don't know how far into the ground it is, but that's one of the 3 sacred stones for the Ute people. So Dr. Jefferson feels that this medicine wheel was probably created by his ancient ancestors. One of the things we point out is this greenish, it looks like moss on the rocks. Can you see that, Becca?
Mm-hmm.
I would have thought it was moss. Sometimes you'll see it growing on trees. It's not. It's called lichen, and there's like 8 different species of lichen in Colorado. And I knew none of this, by the way, 10 years ago. So lichen is different than moss in that moss has a root system. Lichen does not. So it needs a host. So it has to grow either on a tree or on a rock. Otherwise, it can't survive. But one of the important things that we talk that we've learned from foresters and archaeologists and botanists is that when we're studying the lichen, it's really important not to disrupt the lichen in the rocks, because as the lichen grows, it's like a tree. It grows from the center out and it spreads. So it'll spread from one rock onto the next. And when it does, it creates what's called a lichen bridge. So if you can imagine this small plant as it's growing each year, it's bridging from one rock to the next. So we can tell if the lichen grew on the rock in situ, in place, then we can help date that for archaeological reasons. So what we always encourage people is take only pictures and leave only footprints. We really should protect the archaeological integrity of the site, but also for the indigenous people, the spiritual sanctity of the site. When Dr. Jefferson goes out into the forest, and I've had the privilege of doing this many, many times, he'll get real quiet and he'll look off in the trees and he'll whisper. He says, they're here. I can feel them. They're here with us now. And he's talking about his ancestors, and he'll do smudging ceremonies and pray to the trees. And one of the fascinating things for the many Native American people is they see a tree as a living sentient being. They believe it has a spirit. And they also read the tree differently than a lot of us. I might look at this tree on the left. You can see a lightning strike. That's this jagged cut here. Can you see that, Becca, on your screen? And it looks like it's pointing down in an arrow shape. But what the Ute will believe is that that tree was selected by Creator. They believe in one. They call him Father Sky. They refer to him as his father. And they claim whenever Father Sky sends a bolt of lightning to connect Mother Earth, which is sacred, to Father Sky, and they do that through a tree, and the tree lives, that's very powerful medicine for them. And right below that, we see this huge peel bark pattern, and that's often done for the extraction of the outer bark so that the cambium, that's the 4th layer down in a ponderosa pine, so that the cambium layer can be harvested and mixed in with soup or tea or broth for medicinal or nutritional value. So what he thinks is when he sees a tree like this, and this is just south of the Great Sand Dunes National Park, in the Indian Grove area, there's 77 of these huge, large peel bark trees that have been recorded on the National Historic Record. And when Dr. Jefferson saw so many of these trees with a large peel, he said, what this tells me is this was done at a time of great sickness and starvation with my people, a very sad time. Almost certainly there were ancestors buried in this area. On the right, I want to share this part of the tree here has been grafted. You see there's kind of a serrated edge down here at the bottom. Can you see where I'm pointing? And then it has a metal rod, almost like a staple. But notice that this bark is a different color than this bark and a different texture, and it's different than this tree back here. These are three different trees, Ponderosa pine, same species, of three different ages. So the Ponderosa pine will start getting this orangish kind of a cinnamon color as it begins to age. And so this tree is older than this tree, which is older than this tree. So what the elders teach us is that the Native American people can plant trees, transplant trees, and graft part of one tree onto another tree for a purpose. They didn't do that just because they could. But one of the things up here is fascinating is what's called an arborglyph, and it's one of the generally accepted types of trees, the arborglyph. And you can kind of see the top of her head up here. She's facing to the left, a profile, trace the top of her head. Down here is her neck, her nose, her head over here to the left. Can you see the image that I'm trying to?
No, I'm not seeing it quite.
Yeah,
You're talking about the outlines of how the bark
yeah, where
kind
the
of.
bark has been cut around the top, and that's where the top of her head is. And yeah, I'm not getting a good look. Oh, is this any better? Can you see where I'm pointing to her nose, her eye, and top of her head, and her hair? Can you see that at all?
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
you kind of have to squint, but it's like a petroglyph, so it's called an arborglyph. So an arborglyph and the large peel bark are widely accepted types of culturally modified trees. Within the Ute Nation and many other people. I'm having trouble advancing my slide for some reason.
Well, let's stay on this one. But why do you think this youngest tree was grafted onto the oldest tree?
That's a really good question. I don't know. The elder who was there pointing out this tree to me, he referred to this as the old chief's tree, and he also took me about 120 yards away and showed me how to read the grass. And there were some shallow areas there, and we'd seen a burial tree earlier that was pointing in this direction. And he said, "My people are buried here." And he said, if you look where there's a depressed area, you'll see that the grass is greener, and we were there in the spring. You could see some flowers that had blossomed there. And he said that shallow area is getting more snow and water, and so it makes the grass greener and the flowers to grow. And he was very respectful of the ancestors. And when I tried to ask a little bit more about the old chief's tree that he referenced here, he got really quiet, and then he changed the subject, and he moved
Hmm.
away. So I think I was really, stepping on something that was really sacred, and I'm not Native American, and he just was not comfortable in sharing anymore with me. So
Yeah.
let me see if I can get this slide to advance. Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
So um, so whenever we see this large peel bark pattern, almost always the cut at the top, the first cut, is from the lower left to the upper right. So like from 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock position, that happens like
Mhm.
9 out of 10 times. But every once in a while, you see it going the other direction. I'll show you one of those here in a minute. This one also, as you go look at the top, notice that this part of the trunk back has been modified to curve almost a 360-degree around that tree to where it's pointing now at Pikes Peak. That was one of the most sacred mountains for the Ute. They called it Taba, T-A-B-A, which means Sun Mountain. This tree on the right is also a fascinating one. It's near West Cliff, southern Colorado. And so this tree, the trunk, was modified. That's me standing behind it. I'm about 6 foot. So if you reached up about as high as you could and you cut the top of that tree when it was little, and then you bent it to grow in two different directions purposely, this part of the tree points exactly on a compass heading at 180 degrees, perfectly south. So if you stood on the opposite side behind me and you were looking straight north, that would be a compass heading of 0. And what the Ute used was the North Star. That's at 0 on your compass, and they use that for navigational purposes. And then the one on the right is pointing to where the sun sets, the compass heading, where the sun sets on the summer solstice. over the sand dunes. Another
Mm.
feature on both of these. See these large peel bark patterns? That's
Mm-hmm.
not a lightning strike. It doesn't go up and down the trees. That's a purposeful extraction that's very uniform. And there was a Ute medicine man, a shaman, who was talking to one of the elders when we were talking about this tree, trying to figure out this pattern. And he wouldn't talk to us, but he did talk to the elder, and he walked away. And I think it was his way of sharing the information without violating anything in confidence that he had been taught. And what the message was is that when the medicine man or woman, if it's in the Ute tradition, women can also be medicine men or medicine women. So it's not just a male tradition with the Ute,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to many other tribes. What he shared was the bark is often extracted for the medicine to be at the same height of where the wound or the injury or the illness that they're trying to address. So it makes you wonder if this warrior or whoever it was had wounds to the lower extremities, the knees, whatever. And here maybe they had a head wound, and that's what they were trying to address, trying to heal. This is Dr. James Jefferson. He's my mentor. This was taken the first year that we brought the Ute together in the Pikes Peak region for a retreat. Our purpose is try to reconnect the Ute, particularly the children, through the elders back to these sacred trees. So Dr. Jefferson is sharing what he remembers his ancestors talking about, and he remembers his great-grandfather, and he remembers his grandfather and his father talking about his great-grandfather, and this is him. This is Ute Chief Severo, and he was a tribal policeman. And this photo is also published in my first book, and had never been published before, and it was dated in the 1880s. I think the reason this one
What,
was, uh-huh,
John, what is the title of your first book? So we can, maybe people are going to pull up a Google tab or something and want to go look for this.
that'd be great. It's called Ute Indian Prayer Trees of the Pikes
Okay.
Peak region. And then my
Okay.
second book is Native American Prayer Trees of Colorado. So in the second book, it addresses some of the other tribes in all of Colorado. My publisher keeps encouraging me to look at a third book, Native American Culturally Not Modified Trees of the U.S. and Canada. I'm not sure
Oh.
about that just yet. But this photo, if you like old photos like I do, because you have to wonder, this might have been the only photo ever taken of many of these people. And wouldn't you just love to sit down and have a conversation with one of them? This person over here, this would be a fascinating story. And say, well, how did you hurt your hand? What did you do? This
Yeah.
gentleman here is wearing a revolver in a holster. But I think the reason this didn't get ever published before, it was just on a negative. I think that the photographer was probably really disappointed because he had everybody lined up just exactly right, and then this person moved. So he or she, I think it's a she, must have said, "Oh, this is taking too long. I've got better stuff to do," and moved. And that must have upset that photographer because this was at a time, where
Oh,
photographers had
yeah.
big boxes and they put the hood over and they had to get everybody lined up just right and take the lens cap off and expose it. So he was probably upset when that person moved. I think it's priceless because it adds to the story. Um,
Hmm.
and I love looking at how they wore their hair, these beautiful long braids, sometimes
Hmm.
wrapped with something. It could be animal hide, but you could tell they're wearing their finest clothes for this photo. This was taken south of what's today Cortez, Colorado. Really an extraordinary picture. This is in the Fox Run Regional Park. If you're ever looking for a place to go, check out El Paso County's Fox Run Regional Park.
Oh, yeah.
Per acre, probably the greatest density and variety of culturally modified trees that we found anywhere. This is actually two separate trees. This one points right at Tava, so we're guessing it's probably Ute. It has a really nice peel bark pattern here. You can see the gouge marks without a bark, was extracted. This has the dimensions of a
I
huge.
have a I have a question.
Uh-huh.
So family is so important,
Right.
right? You
Uh-huh.
have all these cut bark marks that are low to the ground.
Right.
What if that is for their children?
What's the what?
What if that was for their children?
It very well could have been. And we think that since the dimensions here are consistent with a cradle board, it might have been extracted for a papoose for them to wear on their back. And one of the things the mothers did, Becca, you'd appreciate this being a mother, is sometimes the Ute mothers would hang their cradle boards, the papoose, from a tree. And that would keep the kids from, getting in trouble or, running or crawling away. But what it
Yes.
also did, it allows the wind to rock the babies, rock the cradles. Isn't that wonderful? And
Mm-hmm.
today, the elders talk about how some of their ancestors, the boys in particular, would sleep in the trees, and they would tie the yucca cordage around their waist and to the trees so they wouldn't fall out and hurt themselves. But the young boys in particular were wonderful tree climbers, and they would use the trees for deer stands and observation points. And while they were up there, they would mimic bird calls. So they could pretend if they were a magpie and alert somebody on the ground of approaching danger, like my black lab here who's coming behind the tree. On the right here is another extraordinary tree. It's called the Holy Woman tree, and it's just north of Divide, Colorado. And you can see the orange color in the bark, and that takes about 200 years to get that orangish color. A ponderosa
Mm-hmm.
pine will go, it can live to be between 600 and 800 years old. The oldest one that's known is in Utah. It's 934 years old. So these can be old trees. So this one's several hundred years old. And again, to bend it at that 30-degree angle close to the ground, it had to have been a sapling. It had to have been a very, very young tree. And you can see the tie down marks. And here they've cut to remove the outer bark. So they make the cut at the top, and then they drive a wooden wedge or a stone wedge down, separating the outer bark away from the tree. The heartwood is this bare part here. And the ponderosa can't regrow bark once the bark's been extracted. It might grow around the edges just a little bit, but so you have a cut, and then you have the peel bark, and then down at the bottom we have a tear. So this cut, gouge, tear, cut, gouge, tear. That's a pattern that repeats itself all across Colorado and into to New Mexico. Now, you're not going to see peeled bark on every tree, but when you do, it's an indication that you might have a Native American and possibly Ute culture modified tree. This one is in near Conifer, west of Denver, about 60
Mm-hmm.
miles. It has a wonderful peel bark. It has a tie down mark. It has across up here. It has that 30-degree angle of inclination. And what we've done with Dr. Jefferson, this is him in the gray jacket, is he talked about for years that the dream of the elders would be to return to the shining mountains. That's what they call the 13, 14,000 foot Rockies, so that the elders dreamed of returning to the shining mountains with the children, the next generation, the after generation. And so what we did, and Dr. Jefferson is a founding member, I'm a founding member, we have 3 founding members of the Native American Sacred Trees and Places. And this is our website. We're headquartered in Bailey off of the 285 corridor. But if you go on this website, if you're looking for more information, you don't have to be a member. This is open, on the website to anybody. There's no passwords required. But if you just click on nasstap.org, you'll come to the homepage, and there all of our presenters this year, since we couldn't meet in person with the elders and with the children, the elders recorded all of the presentations like what we're doing now. So
Oh,
we had
awesome.
2 days of presenters. We heard from many Native American people like Dr. Lisa Graciel from the Washoe Nation in Nevada, California area. This is her on the right shaking hands with Bob Capoose, who is a Northern Ute elder out of Fort Duchesne, Utah, who came to Glen Isle for the conference. He's been with us many times. We've had Bob as our keynote speaker, just a wonderful gentleman. And I'll wrap up by sharing this final slide here about some of the books that I've written. The one we've been talking about mostly today, Native American Prayer Trees of Colorado. That's this book 5 here. And Becca's got hold of it for everybody. The library has several copies of that one. And I think tomorrow I'm delivering this one, Rankin Scott Kelly, first sheriff of El Paso County. I was the 26th sheriff of El Paso County. I also wanted to point out this book here, Zach Box and the Pearls of Pleiades. And we'll talk about that one in another author talk. If you're interested in that one, please go on there. But this is it's a sci-fi for young adults. It's heavy into STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. But this one, number 2, just got released last week, and it's Sherlock Holmes in Little London, 1896, The Missing Year. Wonderful story. And I grew up on Sherlock Holmes novels, and I've always been fascinated with him. And what I try to do is emulate the writing style of Conan Doyle in the story as told through Dr. John Watson. For Sherlockians like myself, 1896 has always been a mystery, because out of the 56 short stories and the 4 novels, there's a gap, and nobody's ever explained it. 1896, where was he? There was no publications in the first part of that year up until about the end of November. And so I've solved the mystery. We find Dr. Watson's journal, and it was in a hidden place, and it just came out spring of 2020 this year, just in time for us to have this book available. If you're looking for a Christmas gift and you have somebody who loves Sherlock Holmes or mysteries or historical fiction, this is a wonderful, wonderful story. I'm really proud of the way that came out. Anyway, Becca, I just so enjoyed this. I'm sorry it was kind of the fast version, but I want to turn it back to you, see if you have any other questions, and we'll wrap
I
up.
do. Anybody who knows me knows I have tons of questions. I will try to not go too long. But leaving this slide up for a minute, if people were to look at this and they go, okay, we have a lot of history, but then we have this sci-fi with the space thing. Something you told me before we got started here was that you have 2 focuses. You want to honor the past, and you want to inspire the future.
Exactly.
And looking at this book list, I can see that. I can very much see that. And I think it's great to try and get the interest of a young reader, and then maybe they like your books and they like how you write and they go read your other books, and then you get them hooked into the past and how interesting it is as well. And I think that is so very awesome.
And we have to learn from our past. And you might want to jot down my email address. It's just my initials, JWA122. That was my badge number when I was on the Colorado Springs Police Department. JWA122@comcast.net. And so if you're a young adult reader and you're interested in STEM, or if you're a teacher and you're interested in a summer reading extension program, shoot me an email, and I'll send you for free a student and teacher study guide for STEM. Becca also has it at the library. And what it does is it goes through all 12 chapters, and it comes up with 3 learning objectives.
Of the Zach Box book.
The Zach Box book. And this book is intended to be book 1 of 5 in the Zach Box Saucer series. So each of the other 4 books, when they come out, will also have a study guide. So if there's 12 chapters times 3, that's 36 learning objectives per book. So out of 5 books, that's 180 learning objectives. So when now Truth in Lending, I have to write the other 4 books. so don't look for them this year. So kind of the thought is people, if you're interested in space or fascinated with wondering, well, where are we going to go? Or if you're inspired by authors like I have, like Gene Roddenberry, and if you like the Star Trek series, I grew up on Star Trek, so I love Star Trek. Or um, uh, I was inspired by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and so what I've tried to do is to incorporate the best of those books and those authors and try to bring that into my writing. So I'm really fortunate that I'm in a position now to really focus full time on my writing. And that's the only good thing about COVID, Becca, is I'm much more productive in my writing. I was talking to my publisher last week. We had a telecon, and it was funny. He said something about I think you were spending a little too much time in your field research. That's what I call it when I go out, go to a museum or get in the archives of a library or get out in the field. Or I love
Right.
going to the reservations, and I love sitting down with the elders. I love the ethnographic interviews and the storytelling, and especially at night over a campfire. I just relish that time with the elders. And my publisher laughed. He said, "Well," he said, "I can tell you've been a lot more focused and disciplined on your writing with this COVID since March." So, but my next book out, A to Z, Colorado's Nearly Forgotten History, I think that has a lot of promise. It has 26 short stories, one for each letter of the alphabet, focused from 1776 to 1876. So it goes from when America is born to when Colorado becomes the 38th state of the United States. So, and rather than focus on history that's really well known already, that's in all of our history books, what I try to do is focus on the history that's lesser known, like these trees. That's something that not a lot of people knew about, especially if you weren't Native American. And that's a part of our shared culture and history that I don't think ought to just disappear. I think we ought to cherish those living Native American artifacts, the stories, and those are the kinds of things I try to capture in the next book that'll be coming out in January, February of next year.
Nice. I like it. I like it when you can, you know, reintroduce the youth to the culture that maybe it's their culture, or maybe this is somebody who is a friend of somebody in that culture, and make it known and make it okay. I just really, really like that. My father-in-law was part of something like that in his former life, and I just really I like to see how it blossoms and it takes root, and that's something you should be proud of.
Well, hang on to my email address here. I welcome your emails. Anybody who wants to shoot me an email, or if you're looking for a Christmas gift and you want it autographed, author autograph, or if you want to buy a book for a brother or sister or a child or grandchild, just send me a note and tell me how you want it worded, and we'll work out the shipping and things like that. These four are all on Amazon, so you can actually
Mhm.
order online, and this one's free shipping. I think these are, yeah, I think two of these are free shipping now. And
Okay.
but if anybody's interested in autograph one, shoot me an email and we'll work that out too.
Yeah. And if people want to just try you out for size before they, commit financially, you
Right.
can go to the library. We're going to have your stuff at our library in Simla, and we're the Pines and Plains libraries. And so they can check it out. We do book sharing throughout the libraries here locally, and they can check you out. And then if they like you, then they can go over to Amazon and make a, financial commitment to the shelf on their in their basement or wherever. But okay, you have six published books. One about to come out in the spring is this A to Z Colorado's Nearly Forgotten History.
Right.
And then you have a lot of others that are, you have outlines and whatnot.
Yeah,
So people could get hooked on your reading and your writing and read you for a while yet to come, right?
we hope so.
Good, good. Well, I like it. I like it because you and I have kind of a shared history. We were both contractors.
Uh-huh.
I was not a sheriff. You got that one to yourself. Although I have three boys, so maybe,
Yeah.
sort of similar there. But I like it. John, thank you so much for joining me and talking about your books. And we're going to put this up on our YouTube site, or our YouTube channel rather. And so people can see this for all over anywhere in the country. So if you get emails, you've got your email up there. Um, you might have people asking about these trees. All these trees are in just our local area. So if people have questions, they can call you or contact you.
Actually, I might add they're all over the United States and Canada, the Native American ones, but culturally
Okay.
modified trees exist on 6 of the 7 continents. And
Okay.
so the ones that we think are attributable to the Ute in particular are mostly in their ancestral homeland, which is most of Colorado from the eastern plains all to Utah, from northern New Mexico all the way into Wyoming, a huge, huge ancestral homeland. But there are culturally modified trees that the Cherokee did in Georgia and all the way into British Columbia that other Native American tribes did. So these are
Nice.
out here by the hundreds. Go find them.
Nice. Do you want people to send you a picture if they have one on their property?
That would be great too. And I've gotten some pictures from people in Elbert.
Uh-huh.
So,
Nice. Okay. Well, I think we have covered our topic for today. So I am going to say thank you, and I'm going to hit stop on this recording. So, oh,
thanks,
all
Becca.
right.